At 4:45 p.m. on December 9, 1965, a brilliant fireball streaked across the darkening winter sky, visible from 6 U.S. states and parts of Ontario, Canada, trailing a thick plume of smoke. While millions saw the light in the sky, residents in the small, unincorporated community of Kecksburg, Pennsylvania, experienced something physical. They felt a distinct thump and a vibration that rattled the ground beneath their feet. Locals who rushed into the nearby woods to investigate reported finding a heavy object resting at the bottom of a ravine. Witnesses independently described a metallic craft roughly the size of a small car. It was bronze in color, wide at the base and narrow at the top, resembling a giant acorn. Those who managed to get close before the area was secured noted one specific detail that remains heavily debated. Wrapping along the rounded base of the object were raised markings, described by early responders as resembling unfamiliar script or hieroglyphics. Dozens of people saw a physical structure sitting in their woods, yet within hours, the official government record would state that absolutely nothing was found. Shortly after the object came down, armed Army and Air Force personnel descended on Kecksburg. They swiftly established a perimeter around the woods, cordoning off the search area and actively turning curious residents away at gunpoint. Late into the night, several witnesses claimed they watched a large, acorn-shaped object, now covered by a heavy tarp, get loaded onto the back of a military flatbed truck and driven away from the ravine. By 2 a.m., despite the aggressive lockdown and the hours spent combing the woods, state police and military officials held a press conference. They announced their final conclusion to the assembled crowd. The search had yielded nothing, and the flash in the sky was simply a meteor burning up in the atmosphere. In the days following the event, some residents reported being approached by unfamiliar men in dark suits. These men firmly advised the locals to stop discussing what they had seen in the ravine. A severe contradiction took root in the town. Dozens of unconnected neighbors swore they had seen a recovered craft, while the official military record maintained that there was zero physical evidence to collect. The U.S. Air Force formally classified the Kecksburg incident under Project Blue Book, logging it entirely as a meteor. However, Blue Book's case file was unusually thin, relying heavily on early wire reports rather than a full, independent on-site investigation of the witness claims. The case sat dormant for nearly 40 years, until investigative journalist Leslie Keene partnered with the Coalition for Freedom of Information. In 2003, she filed a formal lawsuit against NASA, attempting to force the release of any internal records the agency held regarding the incident. In 2005, the lawsuit forced a rare public admission. NASA confirmed that its experts actually had examined material connected to the Kecksburg event in 1965, and their analysis concluded it was likely debris from a Soviet satellite re-entering the atmosphere. But in the exact same statement, a NASA spokesperson admitted a glaring problem. The boxes of original documentation detailing that analysis, the exact papers that could prove the Soviet origin, had been completely misplaced and could not be located. The U.S. government's official explanation for the physical debris recovered in Kecksburg exists only as a second-hand summary of paperwork that the government itself admits it has lost. Without the primary source documents, we are forced to weigh the 3 competing theories that have divided researchers for 60 years against the actual timeline of December 9th. The first theory, supported by the strongest independent scientific consensus, argues the fireball was a natural meteor bolide burning up entirely in the atmosphere. Under this reading, the frantic ground search and alleged physical object were the result of mass panic and confusion triggered by a dramatic celestial event. The second theory is NASA's own undocumented stance that the military quietly recovered Cold War-era hardware. Specifically, researchers point to the failed Cosmos 96 probe, a Soviet satellite launched around that time that failed to leave Earth's orbit. This explanation aligns closely with the physical evidence on the ground. The descent module of the probe matches the distinctive acorn shape reported by locals, and recovering identifiable Soviet technology would absolutely warrant extreme military secrecy in the 1960s. However, independent orbital calculations have repeatedly raised doubts. The re-entry timing and trajectory for Cosmos 96 do not cleanly align with the exact time the fireball was spotted over Pennsylvania. The third theory suggests the civilian eyewitnesses accurately described exactly what they saw: a metallic craft unlike typical satellite debris, bearing unexplainable markings whose true origin remains entirely classified. None of these answers perfectly balance the equation. You must either discount the scientific trajectory data, ignore the consistent testimony of the locals, or explain why armed troops locked down an entire forest for a routine meteor sighting. Kecksburg has never moved on from that night. The town's volunteer fire department now hosts an annual UFO festival, permanently displaying a life-sized, acorn-shaped replica of the craft right outside the firehouse. As recently as 2021, new Freedom of Information Act requests surfaced documents that added minor details to the timeline of the military's involvement, yet they still failed to produce any physical evidence of the object itself. The durability of this case doesn't rely on a belief in extraterrestrials. It rests entirely on the documented discrepancies in how the official government investigation was handled. Even the most skeptical reading leaves us with an armed military cordon sealing off a public woods, drawing weapons on civilians over what they claimed was a standard atmospheric phenomenon. 60 years later, the incident remains deadlocked. It sits exactly where it started, caught between a scientifically plausible sky event, a small town of ordinary people who say they know what they saw, and a government that managed to lose the only proof of its own story.